What's up, guys? Welcome to our 9th video tutorial, and we are going to keep talking about managed beans. So before we talk about the scopes, we need to learn one more, or actually two more annotations, and they are both equally the same, except that since we are talking about we are now talking about JSF managed beans or CDI managed beans, depending on what you implemented in your application, then we have to know the annotations for each scenario. So right now we are in the login bean CDI, which uses CDI managed beans. And one annotation that you guys need to know is how you can inject a managed bean into another managed bean. So the JavaServer Faces framework actually helps us with that. And for those who don't know exactly what dependency injection is basically when we have an attribute here, for example, and this object declaration, actually, the class declaration, this basically becomes a dependency of this class, of the login bean class. That means that the login bean cannot work without a user instance, and that makes it a dependency. So there are several ways of solving the issue and using dependency injection, which is basically it's a principle of inversion of control, and inserting the managed bean or the object or the instance in runtime instead of compilation time. And this is extremely powerful and extremely useful in applications. So for those who don't really understand the concept, I recommend you read into it a little bit, but I will give you a debrief of how this works. So and I will actually tell you guys how it works through Annotations, which is basically through the reflection API of Java. And the way that this works is basically if we press and maintain the control and hover over, you can see that we get some sort of a link on each of the instances, types, and everything that could be referenced to to Java. Then in this case, we're going to go to the session scoped annotation. As you can see, we have basically some sort of a class declaration, sorry. But as you can see here, we have the @ symbol previous to the interface, and this is what allows us to actually use annotations. This is how we create annotations: the @ interface, and the name of the annotation is going to be session scope, which is precisely what we're using here. And it takes some other scopes, annotations. So the ones that you really need to understand are the retention and the target. Retention is basically when you want to run this annotation, because you can either do it at compilation or at runtime. And the target is basically where you can place the annotations. So here you can place the session scope, can be placed in any type, any method, and any field. Okay, the default value for target, for example, is for all. That means that you can place the annotation everywhere. And this is sort of like a basic introduction to what the reflection API, how it works. And what would happen is in another, for example, a main method or something like that, you would actually read this implementation and do accordingly depending on the requirements. In this case, there are no, for example, methods. So Basically, it just what happens is that in this case, JavaServer Faces knows that this session scope, even though it doesn't have any attributes, it's going to behave a certain way as soon as you read it through the Reflection API. And the same goes for all of the annotations here, named, managed bean, and every annotation is read through the Reflection API. And as you can see here, for example, the managed bean has two attributes. Remember the eager and the name or the value. And this is declared as a method. So as you can see, we have the name here, which is default is empty string, and eager, which basically tells the JavaServer Faces application to either create the instance of the managed bean as soon as the application is started, or in a lazy manner, which is the default way, which would be basically what I told you guys previously, which is when you require the instance, then it will be created. That's the lazy manner. So that was a brief introduction on what the Reflection API is and how it works, sort of. It obviously is a lot more complex than that. That was just the simple explanation, but I recommend you guys give a little bit of a read to the Reflection API and dependency injections and stuff like that. But for the moment, now that we understand a little bit about that, we can keep talking about the annotations. So two annotations that you need to understand are the @inject and the managed property. All right. And the inject annotation is for CDI managed beans, and the managed property is for JSF managed beans. So, and they are equally the same. All right. What else do you guys need to understand about this? Basically, all you do is, for example, in this login bean CDI, if we wanted to inject the login bean managed bean, then what we would do is use the @inject, and this would inject the instance at runtime. And it obviously is very powerful and useful in case you, for example, have a view scope here, and you're doing some sort of login validation or stuff like that, and your other bean, the bean that you're injecting, is, for example, a session scope, and it basically maintains or tells you what the actual or the current logged in user is, or something like that. And well, it's really useful for you guys to understand this concept, but it's extremely simple. All you have to do is use the @inject. Both of them have to have at least the setter methods, because that's the way that the JavaServer Faces instantiates this variable. So that's pretty much it about dependency injection. Now, what we're going to talk about, or the main topic, was session scopes. So, not session scopes, scopes. So, what basically we need to understand how or when to use them, right? And it's pretty simple. I mean, you guys already had a debrief of each scope. And let me just give you guys like a reminder and explain a bit deeper what each scope means. So the request scope lives as long as the request response cycle HTTP is done. All right. So as soon as the single HTTP request response cycle lives, that managed bean will live. All right. And just so you get a more grasp, or maybe you guys forgot what that was, is this precisely. Remember that we were talking about the lifecycle and it had 6 processes on every request response. Basically, that's what it's doing. So a request scope is going to live throughout these 6 phases, and then the scope or the managed bean itself is going to be destroyed by the JSF framework. Keep in mind that, for example, the AJAX request counts as a single HTTP request also. So that would mean that whenever you make an AJAX request, which we will see in later tutorials, that is a single HTTP request, which means that the bean that you are using, if it is request scoped, then it'll live only through that AJAX request, and that's it. Another one was the bean, the view scoped bean, and it's basically it's going to live as long as you're interacting with the same JSF view by postbacks, which call action methods returning either null or void without any navigation or redirection, right? So let me just give you an understanding on the postbacks. So in the restore view phase, there are 2 cases, okay? And those 2 cases are either postback or non-postback requests. The non-postback requests refers to a new request to a page. So the restore view phase creates an empty UI component tree and stores it in the current phases context instance. And for example, for the non-postbacks request, the JSF lifecycle goes directly to the last phase, which is the render response right here, because it doesn't really have any content to be submitted, right? It's just an empty tree. That's why it jumps to the last phase. Let's see, what else can we say about non-postbacks? Actually, the UI components tree state is saved in the JavaServer phases view state for the next request. And for the postback requests, what happens is that this occurs only when the content of a form is submitted on the same page using HTTP post method, right? So in this case, the restore view phase restores the UI components tree from the JSF view state that was generated from the previous page request. And well, you guys will be understanding this a little bit further as we go on through the tutorial, but it's pretty simple as soon as you get the grasp of how JavaServer Faces works. But let's just continue for the moment. So another one which we haven't talked at all about, which is the flow scope. It lives as long as your navigation or you're navigating through the specified collection of views registered in the flow configuration file. And this is one of the reasons why we haven't talked that much about flow scope. We just mentioned it when we mentioned scopes in previous tutorials, but we will be doing an example of flow scopes later in other tutorials. But just keep in mind that for you to have a flow scope, that means that your application has a flow of how it navigates through different pages. You have to have some configurations and declare that configuration in the flow configuration file. The session scoped lives as long as the established HTTP session is alive. Basically, that means that there's a session in the server, and that session is gonna live as long as your browser is opened. That's basically it. The session is created as soon as you open a browser, and obviously you're in some sort of application that requires user registration or login or stuff like that. And that session object is transferred and is used even if you open another tab. Okay, so that's a big thing to understand because, well, for example, in CDI managed beans, we have different annotations. This is extremely important to grasp. So the session scope bean lives as long as the registered or the established HTTP session is alive. And well, that's basically it. And we have another one, which is application scoped. That application scoped, or that bean, which is tagged as application scoped, will live as long as the web application runs, right? So that means that every client or every browser that requests the managed bean, which is using application scope, will be the same for all of the users. Okay, so as you can see, we have a lot of tools so that we can implement proper applications. And so, well, this is pretty much it. Now, which scope to choose depends basically on the data. The bean, the data that the managed bean holds and represents. So, for example, we can use request scopes for simple and non-AJAX forms presentations. We can use flow scope for a wizard, some sort of pattern of collecting input data spread over multiple pages. What else? View scoped is probably going to be used with rich AJAX dynamic views, like AJAX-based validation or AJAX rendering or AJAX dialogues or stuff like that. What else? We can use session scope for client specific data, such as the logged in user and the user preferences like the language, and maybe if you have a way more dynamic application where your user can like, for example, rearrange how things look in their website and stuff like that. So that's where you would keep all that information in the session scope. You can use application scope for such as drop-down lists, which are the same for everybody, right? So say, for example, if you have a database with all of the cities and countries in the world, you wouldn't want an instance to be created for every single client that uses that type of information, because that's going to be the same for every single user. So it's not logical for you guys to use, for example, a request scope for a managed bean that just handles a list or a map of cities and countries. That's extremely insane. So that's one of the examples that I can give you right now. This is probably all you guys want to know or understand about bean scopes. And well, while we go through the tutorials, you guys will be understanding these with a lot more grasp, because I know the theoretical way of understanding things usually actually makes you not understand anything. But hopefully you guys understood what each scope is for and the annotations that we have seen so far. And also, I do recommend for you guys to start playing around and creating your own examples and just asking yourselves, what if I did this and this and this, and start playing out with all of the annotations and all of the things that we have learned so far, so that you first of all don't forget what we have learned. And well, you know that obviously the more you practice, the better you will understand and the better you will get at, well, the whatever you're practicing at. So thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next tutorial.